He who makes a beast out of himself gets rid of the pain of being a man.
Welcome to the Unrealistic Elephant Podcast. And welcome back to the Unrealistic Elephant Podcast. My name is Nathan.
My name is Blinky, and we have a guest here with us.
My name is Brandon, and thank you for having me on the cast. Thank you.
Hey, Brandon. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I am a counselor and a life coach, and I've been spending the past about a year focusing on building my coaching practice, and I spent the last couple years, 5 years in total, studying to become a counselor. And I've also spent time in Ecuador and Peru, where I drank ayahuasca and volunteered at an ayahuasca retreat. And I'm a painter, musician, and writer, and a bunch of other things. So that's kind of the most interesting stuff, I guess. Yeah.
Nice. And you're also working on building up
Yeah.
your own online presence, too. So why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah. So I have an Instagram page where I post reels about my coaching or counseling practice, and more recently I want to start creating my own mental health podcast where I discuss something called internal family systems. It's sometimes referred to as parts work. It's a therapeutic tool. I also want to talk about what's called complex trauma and just plant medicine, breath work, art therapy, and just all different topics around mental health that I feel like I can speak to and just kind of give shine some awareness on.
Yeah, nice. And it's interesting because I've been thinking about doing mental health videos for YouTube in some format. I'm not really sure what the format is, which is part of the reason I haven't done it yet.
Yeah,
but I figure
absolutely.
a good place to start is by bringing an actual counselor onto our podcast. So welcome and thank you. And me and Brandon have been talking for a while. We were talking about working on a video about the movie we're going to talk about today. But before we get into that, I think Brandon has some stories to tell us about Ecuador.
Yes, you
Yeah.
have quite a bit to tell us from what I understand, and I'm honestly really excited.
Well, I'm curious, do you guys want to hear about Peru or Ecuador? Peru would be where I did my own ayahuasca retreat as a participant, and Ecuador is where I volunteered and did a work exchange, and where I was kind of like, a part of the experience, but also more just there in the chaos of it for about a month and a half.
Well, wherever you want to start.
Okay, so when I was in Iquitos, it's this jungle-adjacent city that basically is like, if you look it up on Google Maps, it's smack dab right in the middle of the jungle, and it's only accessible by boat or by plane. And it's basically known as this like shamanic city. Ayahuasca is a really big part of the culture there. And I heard about this retreat from a friend in Canada, and he recommended I go check it out because I was looking for the Shipibo lineage, essentially knowing that they have a long-standing history with being ayahuasca shamans.
Yeah.
So I went there for a 2-week retreat. And
Maybe you should explain what ayahuasca is, just in case anybody listening does not
100%.
understand. So,
Gotcha. I think of it so much as like I feel like everybody knows what it is because it's becoming more mainstream, but for sure, if you don't know what ayahuasca is, it actually, the word, I believe it's Quechua, which is an indigenous tradition of somewhere in the Amazon, central Amazon. It means vine of the soul, and ayahuasca is this plant brew, so it's a psychedelic brew that it combines a leaf called the chacruna leaf, which is technically the Chacruna viridis plant, and that is combined with a root called the capi vine, sometimes referred to as Banisteriopsis capi. And these two plants, they were like discovered, I won't say at random, because like there was ways to which the Amazonian indigenous could identify these plants, and they didn't just do it trial and error style. Like I don't know how that would be possible, but they combined a root and a leaf, and it created this effect that basically would be something like 6 to 10 hours of visions. And then this tea is used in a more modern context to help, let's just say, Westerners or various different cultures heal from trauma or essentially reach insights about something that they've been trying to heal, and it's often not. It's very unpleasant. It's in the form of puking, sometimes shitting, and it's held in a ceremony for the whole night. So a lot of times people have some pretty unpleasant experiences to report after that. Yeah.
Yeah, because I've never done ayahuasca myself, but I have done DMT, which comes from the same plant. And what would you say like the differences are between ayahuasca and DMT? I know that ayahuasca lasts a lot longer, and DMT is like maybe 10-15 minutes once you break through.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I guess, what are some differences you could bring up?
100%. Well, firstly, I should have mentioned the chacruna leaf that contains the DMT. And yeah, the type of DMT that's in ayahuasca is very different because the DMT that you smoke, it's typically referred to as either pure extract or NN-DMT. That DMT has been chemically essentially reduced to like a crystal, right? So you have to smoke it out of a pipe, and that's one of the versions. Let's just say we're referring to that DMT, NN-DMT. That shit's crazy. It's like it jumps you really deep, really fast. I've smoked that type of DMT at least two or three times, and I don't recommend doing it unless you're prepared, because it's kind of like you just do this thing as simple as just inhaling and holding your breath for like maybe 30 seconds, and you're blasted into a completely different dimension. Sometimes you meet aliens. Often you meet some kind of like entity that you could refer to as God.
I met like a giant moth thing, which like brought me over this landscape of I don't know. It was kind of like being at the end of 2001: A Space Odyssey, but with a giant moth that was leading me around.
It's kind of kaleidoscopic, and it's super, super intense. I kind of remember it like you feel like you're dreaming in this space, but you can't exactly equate it to feeling like a dream. It all feels so real, and I kind of describe it, if you want my theory around it, is you're being shown reality. Like if this is all a matrix, if this is all simulation, it's kind of like you're stripping back all the layers of what's interrupting the real, and then DMT shows you that real, even just for like 10-15 minutes, and it's very overwhelming oftentimes, but it's also very beautiful, right? What you experience, what you see, it's bringing you closer to something that, whether that's God, whether that's the reality that we're kind of not able to access with our regular consciousness. You're accessing something bigger than you, and something, I would say, that is just realer.
Yeah, it's tapping into chemicals in your brain that like you honestly maybe don't even know are there, and then you like enter into this world, this dimension, whatever you want to call it, and it's a very, not exactly just a experience of getting super duper high, but it can also be very eye-opening. And it was, for me, and I've heard more from people who've always taken it too, is that like it really just shows you a whole, or it makes you, not even just shows you, but it makes you feel like you're in this whole other universe, and like nothing that you've ever experienced is actually real, and you're just here. And it's a pretty it's a very intense, powerful drug. I would not recommend doing it unless you're adequately prepared, like you said.
Yeah, and just to get back to your question, comparing this experience of smoking a crystal, right? It's an extracted form of DMT, where it only lasts like 10 or 15 minutes, and then you have to make sense of that. Versus ayahuasca, there's a lot of preparation. You often have to go to a retreat. You're often working with a shaman. Actually, I would say in every case you should be working with a shaman, but not everyone does. But it's like you're working with this shaman, and there's something of a preparation process, and the ceremony lasts, again, something like 12 hours. The ayahuasca maybe doesn't last that long, but the whole process lasts 12 hours. And then after the fact, you talk about it. There's a lot of emphasis on integration, which is just like talking about what came up. So with DMT, ideally you have those same things in place, but oftentimes those same safeguards don't exist. Like you can get DMT I won't say pretty much anywhere, but in Canada you could buy it at a store downtown.
Yep, you can. I just went into that store, like I got some LSD from a store. you can actually buy it, and you can also go buy like peyote and coca leaves.
That's crazy
and, like,
for me because I'm
we're not trying to
living on
advocate
the
for that
whole
either,
other
but-
side of the country, and none of that is available on our side. So that's just wild to me.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, is that when I moved to Vancouver before, or in like 2014, I want to say, I think, that was actually before weed was legalized. So the concept of just going into a weed store was like pretty crazy. And then what happened is that weed got legalized, so all those stores turned into government stores, and then the weed people started dealing in other drugs like mushrooms, which are basically decriminalized everywhere. But there are specific stores that you can go into and buy these other substances like peyote, LSD, coca leaves, and not
Which
that
is
I'm
so overwhelming.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like,
I mean, I haven't even done like half the drugs that are available just at store, and
yeah.
yeah, and again, it's not that I'm necessarily condoning drug use, but I would rather it be like this rather than having it go to drug dealers and like making the world like so much more. Yeah, I just don't believe in the war on drugs at all.
Well, there's a lot of different rabbit holes we could go down. Right off the bat, I just want to say, even ayahuasca is accessible. Unfortunately, in parts of Peru, it's actually it is fully legal in Peru, not in Canada, but it is fully legal in Peru. And sadly, you could buy ayahuasca pretty much anywhere, similar to the fact that you could buy DMT pretty much anywhere there. And I just want to say that as much as it's accessible, I would find it's really important for us to recognize that these are very, very, very powerful molecules. These are very, very powerful psychedelics, and it can have lasting impacts. Whether that's good or bad, that really depends on like the safeguards that are in place, the person's personal intention. I don't know if you guys have heard of set and setting, but there's a bit of a harm reduction perspective I like to take when we start to look at DMT especially, right?
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure DMT itself is legal in Canada, if I'm not mistaken, because it's just not that well known, and it is a natural drug. It comes from tree bark.
Yeah, actually, that's important to note. There's been a lot of controversy around how technically the leaf itself containing the DMT, where it's not legal, you could get in some shit if you're containing the leaf itself, but let's just say the cartridge, the vaporizer, stuff like that. I don't know if don't quote me on this, don't hold me to this, but I don't think it is illegal. But then when you mix it with the kapi vine and it becomes the ayahuasca brew, that is technically illegal, and you could get a sentence from carrying that on you. So
okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I highly doubt you will, given like the amount of drug addicts that are around Vancouver. But
yeah, as a personal user, maybe not, right? Yeah, that's fair.
But then again, like we said, we're not necessarily condoning. We're just putting the facts out there from what we've experienced. So
for education's sake, for understanding what ayahuasca is, and just to bring us back to that. So yeah, DMT, quick and fast, very accessible, but at the same time, maybe on some level normalized in Western culture, that you smoke DMT, you'll meet God, and it's kind of like I think they call it the businessman's psychedelic or something, because it's just so fast. You can do it in 15 minutes, and then you're sober. And then you compare that to, say, ayahuasca, where sometimes, at least in the tradition I experienced, there's what's called the dieta. So it's a lot of preparation. You prepare the body, you prepare the mind. Sometimes it requires you to travel, right, somewhere remote, especially if you go to the jungle. It's a huge expense. It's a huge commitment. So then DMT, in the extract version, it's no commitment. You can smoke it, and then you can go to lunch with your buddy. But
yeah, I think that's what we did actually when I smoked it that one time. But but like it is this thing where it was very much a spiritual experience, and I mean, drugs are just a tool that you can use. Like, it's as long as it's not something you're relying on or addicted to, or you have an addictive personality or something like that. I mean, I would say you could just feel free to experiment and be safe about it. Make sure that you get it from a reputable source, and that you're
you can test DMT at a drug testing site downtown. That's actually probably like 20-minute drive from where you would pick up the DMT. So just test your drugs, folks, even if it's DMT.
Are you
Probably
talking
doesn't
about
hurt.
get your drugs tested?
I used to work at Get Your Drugs
Oh,
Tested,
wow.
actually.
So did I. Well, not that part of it. I worked at the dispensary.
Oh, okay.
That's
Yeah.
how me and Brandon met, is that we worked
Oh,
at the,
wow.
the dispensary together.
right.
That's awesome.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Now,
One day I'll get into crazy customer stories at the dispensary, because there was some fun
Oh my
stuff
God,
that happened.
yeah.
But that'll be for a different
Yeah.
podcast, I think.
so one question I have is, I think of the three of us, I'm the only one who hasn't tried any actual hallucinogens. I've never done even LSD, mushrooms, anything like that. I've basically only done marijuana, cannabis, things like that, stuff to relax myself, because a lot of the issues I have are mostly anxiety based, and I have a lot of anxiety about trying out something like that. And you say things like being prepared. How would one even prepare for something that sounds so life changing and over the top as something like this?
So, set and setting is a harm reduction philosophy that really refers to set being kind of like your overall intention, and if I'm remembering correctly, it's really just about your mindset and where you source the substance and stuff like that. It's preparing you, having the right set mindset, and then setting is really about the environment to which you're using the substance, really creating the safety even just within your body and within your internal experience, and then having a right guide if you feel like that's necessary. So it's kind of the idea that all psychedelics are unpredictable. On some level, you're kind of just like throwing the die and trusting a certain medicine, but you can do your due diligence. You can research a little bit. Like there's a great website called Arrowid where you can read about psychedelic reports, trip reports, and sometimes get a little bit of perspective. Don't bias yourself too much, but sometimes if it's a substance that you're taking that lasts for, let's just say, 12 hours, like LSD, it's helpful to know what's the common experience, what's the common trip kind of like what are some of the common experiences. And then I would say if you can get a buddy to just kind of hang out with you sober, not necessarily like a guide or a therapist, a trip sitter, exactly, because like you can pay to have an individual who's trained in psychedelic harm reduction kind of be your guide. But I would say even just having a buddy around who you trust, who you could essentially just kind of like who can check in with you and just keep your physical environment in a good kind of like balance, because like just having your basic human needs met, right? Just drinking enough water, eating your meals, making sure you're in a safe place physically so that you're not hurting yourself unintentionally, and then maybe either a buddy who you can talk about stuff if you're kind of feeling emotionally vulnerable, because like there's a possibility something might come up, some intense emotion that maybe you've never sat with before, and just knowing that you don't have to have like a therapist with you, but maybe just a buddy who can at least be like, yeah, okay, you're gonna be okay, man, and maybe can distract you. Actually, there's some help. There is benefit just in having somebody who knows how to, I don't know, just create that safety for you, whatever that looks like for you, right?
Just have some sort of semblance of security during that time. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and maybe getting the drug tested too, right? Like knowing what you're dealing with, knowing if it's cut with something, and then maybe you look for a source where it isn't cut with something, and then you can have that certainty where you're like, okay, well, is this just going to go off the rails due to some sort of unpredictability? And just trying to avoid unpredictable curveballs, really.
Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a very good advice, I would say. And I don't know if you said you haven't done mushrooms. I mean, that was kind of a starter one for me. I usually don't do mushrooms because they kind of fuck with my stomach, which is the same reason I don't drink that much. But, I would just say, also pace yourself. Make sure, that's the good thing about mushrooms is that you get them in like a bag and you can like take small intakes and you can just keep going if you don't feel anything. But yeah, that's kind of where I would recommend starting. I don't know if you agree, Brandon, but...
Start slow.
Yeah.
And always try to maybe undershoot your dose. Once you've taken too much, you can't really do much about that. But if you undershoot a dose and you're like, oh, I didn't quite get where I want to go, that's okay too. So you can ease your way into a more profound experience. And there's a lot of great YouTube content. So if you look up, tips for taking mushrooms or something, right? There's a lot of dedicated content that specifically gets into like LSD or mushrooms, and they can walk you through all sorts of great stuff. I spent a long time just watching videos like that when I was in my, let's just call it my prime of taking psychedelics, and it helped me just feel comfortable with it, right? Like on some level that's part of the set, right? It's part of setting that mindset, getting into a good headspace beforehand, doing a little bit of research, just feeling comfortable with the experience. Because if you have an association that this is going to be fucking crazy, like the anxiety in itself might actually be something that you need to overcome first before you get into that space, because that anxiety might be the point of entry.
Yeah, no,
right?
that's definitely my biggest roadblock to having not tried any of this stuff yet, is I already have this anxious mind, and thinking about doing it gives me anxiety. So it sort of feels like if I go through with it, would have to be when I'm in some sort of placid, calm state, which just doesn't happen very often for me, with the exception of smoking a little bit of pot or something like that. And it's something I've always wanted to try, because it really makes me think like, well, if I went through this experience and I was in the right headspace, could that change some things for me? Could that change how I feel day to day from an experience like that?
Yeah, but I mean, it's also the same thing as that. Even with like marijuana, you say that helps you with your anxiety. I know a lot of people that makes their anxiety way worse when they smoke weed or something. So, I mean, it's all about how your body and your mind like kind of reacts to stuff like that. And
yeah.
So that's
and I know I was that way when I first started smoking too. I remember the second time I ever smoked with you and our friend Braden. I was just walking around town, just scared that someone was going to get me.
Yeah, that's a barrier of entry when I started smoking too, is that I would get into like these paranoid states at times.
Well,
but
I feel like whereas it's a helpful like frame of reference to have marijuana, which by the way in high enough doses is similar to a psychedelic, like some of these edibles we had at the dispensary. 100%, you're basically setting yourself up for a trip. But I would say that it's crazy, but I would say comparing THC in the regular dose that we ingest it just say to relax or to sleep, it's definitely not, it's so different. It's so different than comparing it to psychedelics like say mushrooms or LSD. And I would almost say that comparing two substances side by side can be very, very, I won't say challenging, but it can misrepresent the molecule and the experience of that molecule as it is, because man, they just they operate differently in the brain. They activate different mechanisms within the body. So it's like saying even if you smoke a bunch of weed, it can be kind of similar in some ways. It's probably also very different. That's something to just note.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Just to bring us back a little bit to backtrack a little bit, the topic of addiction. I know we didn't really we brought it up in just ever so slightly, but I kind of wanted to introduce how I first heard about ayahuasca, because most people in Vancouver, they probably heard of Gabor Mate. He's a addictions researcher who spent, I think, 15 years, well, first he spent most of his life studying to become a doctor, and he went and worked at Vancouver General Hospital in the trauma ward, in one of the emergency wards, and then eventually he was getting so burned out, they said, hey, you got to try something else. And he's like, okay, I'll work in these addictions clinic downtown. That seems better. And I mean, realistically, that was probably one of the best decisions he ever made in his life, but it was actually due to burnout. So he started working in these addictions clinics. I think it was called Portland. It was an addictions clinic on the downtown east side. And after 15 years of working with, heroin addiction, the fentanyl crisis as it was unfolding, all sorts of different various drugs, crack and methamphetamines, he came across ayahuasca as essentially kind of like a last-ditch effort to help some of these problem users, people who are using drugs, to help reorganize their system, to help kind of clear something that was getting in the way of sobriety. And no, it's not like you drink ayahuasca and then wham bam you're sober, but that was one of the things that was kind of preached as one of the more effective tools for combating severe addiction, was bringing someone to an ayahuasca ceremony. Like Gabor Mate actually lost his medical license because he advocated so strongly for the use of ayahuasca, where in Canada it wasn't legal. So, you know, they had to fight him on that.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's where I heard about it first, and then I got curious about it. You know, this took me about 5 or 6 years of doing my own research, really garnering the courage to actually go in and find a shaman myself, and then eventually landing in Peru. And you know, regardless of how well researched your option is, there's always going to be like uncertainties. Like for me, I was doing 8 ceremonies, and it's kind of like you can't come out of that one without expecting it's gonna build up to something big. And I mean, I'd spent a long time doing psychedelics, and I'd done DMT a few times, but I'd never done ayahuasca, right? Like, this was my first experience drinking ayahuasca. Was in this retreat where they start you off, let's just say slow, but progressively you build up to some pretty big, pretty challenging experiences. And I don't need to get into the explicit details, but I had some of the hardest moments in my life, you know, which is crazy, because I thought I'd experienced a lot of my harder moments in my teen years, but no,
Yeah.
the hardest moments of my life was revisiting some of these things, some of the pain, some of the fear, some of the really, really terrifying things that surfaced. And you know, it feels manageable while you're, let's just say, in the Maloka, but then there are points afterwards where I don't know, I'm still integrating it. It's just what I want to say. Like, you know, it's going to take me years to integrate drinking ayahuasca even once, but then like once you build up to larger doses, you just go deeper. You just get down to the more core stuff. And yeah.
Yeah,
I'll do it
that's
again,
why
though.
like doing it in like a shaman circle or something like that is probably for the best, because it's with something like that, it's really good to
Yeah.
set an intention with
That's right.
just what you do. Like, and that's the whole kind of issue with a lot of drug addiction in general, is that people are just doing it as an escape. And it's like, if you know, the intention is more so to look into yourself and find new things about the world and your reality and your perception and your consciousness. I mean, that to me is like, you know, people misuse something that can help them do that, because a lot of these like drugs were, you know, used in ancient circles and stuff like that. I'm pretty sure Jesus even smoked weed, and I'm not even joking. But
Probably.
yeah. So like, yeah, a lot of these religions and stuff, they're a lot of them were based out of you know, the drug, and that's probably why so many religions got interpreted, because people were misinterpreted because they were really, really
Yeah.
fucking high, and while they were listening to this stuff. So
Some of the most so there's a book called Supernatural, and gosh, I can't remember the author at this time, but it's all about the cave paintings in parts of France, in this underwater underground cave, where essentially some of the first cave paintings were apparently the result, they theorize were the result of shamans or regular folks, probably shamans though, drinking psychedelics, which they presumed to be similar to ayahuasca. And it changed something in their brains, where they were able to start thinking in terms of symbols. So basically they were theorizing at a certain point up until a certain generation. They didn't need to. Everything was oral history. There was no need to put things into some sort of symbolic representation. But the theory is as these psychedelics changed their brains, as they started to change the way they thought about the world, they would start to feel like, hey, I can reconstruct things in terms of a cave painting, and I can represent something symbolically. And obviously the impact that's had on the world is tremendous. So yeah, just trying to show you the degree to which these compounds have influenced humankind and the way we think historically. It just it's profound. It's profound how much influence it's had.
Absolutely, and I mean, I think that's still happening to this day because you bring up cave drawings, but even like a cartoon can have the same sort of implications. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
just as a random example, like South Park or something like that. It's just like on the
Yeah.
surface, it's just the most crass, like juvenile thing ever, but beneath the surface, it's like the smartest thing ever. So I mean, like so much of like how art and all this stuff plays into history and even these ceremonial circles and stuff like that, and so much of the world today is moving more towards like technology and stuff like that, but I mean we gotta remember our spiritual roots and what it actually means to be human, because if we don't, it's
Mm.
taking us into this whole other anyway, I feel like I'm getting a little bit preachy
No,
and a little bit
yeah,
like
no,
fucking
I appreciate what you just said around like getting in touch with our spiritual roots and remembering what it means to be human. That's probably like one of the underlying purposes for going to the jungle and sitting with these shamans and drinking this medicine that just really like changes everything. It's like I did feel for most of my time studying psychology and even studying counseling, it's hard not to get on some level disconnected from your spiritual nature. I mean, even when you take psychedelics and you get like a taste of it, it felt to me like I wasn't going deep enough, and there was something in the body that was still kind of holding on. It could be the ego. It could just be like I wasn't really truly surrendering. Like there's a big concept that comes up a lot in the spiritual psychedelic community. It's just like you have to surrender. You have to be able to let go. You have to let your mind basically just completely die. And that is a very, very, very challenging thing to do in practice. In theory, it's like, oh, so I just like let my mind have less control over me. But then it's like, try
Yeah.
doing that. Try
yeah.
even meditating. For the most part, it's a very challenging thing to actually do.
Yeah, it's 100%.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
but yeah,
But it can be facilitated by some of these
Absolutely.
experiences. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like this is all pertinent to the movie we're getting to. But before we get to that, yeah. So, did you want to tell us? I guess we talked about just the experience
Peru
around this
mostly.
stuff and like that. But I mean, was there anything else you wanted to get into in terms of
Yeah,
like
any sort of
Peru or
stories or
Ecuador?
anything like that?
Stories. Yeah. Well, Peru, I think was mostly introspective because I spent 2 weeks on a retreat, not doing nothing necessarily, but we were encouraged just to basically just to sit in the Maloka or sit in our tombos, which are basically just like a little
Okay.
bare bones room, and we're really encouraged to do much. Now in Ecuador, this is where there would be a lot more stuff that actually happened because I was basically facilitating, which is kind of like the role of where you're supporting guests during ceremonies, just kind of like getting toilet paper, getting buckets, changing out puke buckets and stuff. But like you're also talking with them in between ceremonies, and I was doing that for a month solid. So that each retreat was 2 weeks long, and people would fly from all over the world to attend these retreats, and some of them would stay for 7 days, some of them would stay for 12 days. But it was basically kind of just like, you know, 20 to 30 folks, probably more than that, probably close something like 50 folks' first ayahuasca journeys. I was just kind of there, and I'm like, I just did my 8 ceremonies a month ago, and I'm here just kind of like, oh boy, here we go. And I mean, the experience of the ceremony is very, very beautiful to witness. It's basically kind of like you see this ceremony happen, and it's really beautiful. There's lots of music. It's around a fire. It's a lot of beautiful community and safety. But I would say many people, the first ceremony, it doesn't seem to go as planned. Like there's a lot of physical releases. So like something I wanted to mention earlier is the way the indigenous Amazonian traditions used ayahuasca before the West kind of came in and got curious. It was basically a physical release, right? It was a purgative. It was very much just about releasing all the crap in the body, getting rid of all that. And many Westerners, they have this idea about, finding God, or like searching for enlightenment, or it's about healing trauma, and which are, by the way, incredibly valuable and important quests, right? Those are inquiries that I would recommend anyone goes into. However, from the indigenous lens, it's kind of like you drink this tea, you shit or you puke, and that's the medicine. That's the purge.
Yeah.
That's la purga. That's in Spanish. It's getting rid of the toxins and the dark energy sometimes. So going there and seeing so many people like super optimistic, super excited, just stoked to be in Ecuador, right? And then they get there and they do their first ceremony and they're like, what the fuck was that? Like, I have never been in so much pain and puked and it seems to be very unpleasant. And then I guess for what I was trying to say is the difference between the folks that take away kind of like a level of optimism from that, like there's almost like a reframing of, wow, I got a lot of stuff out of my body. I cleaned real good. Like, you're kind of cleaning out the pipes in a way. And some folks, they're like, they did kind of compared it to, hey, is this going to be kind of like a high dose of mushrooms? Is it going to be like, am I going to see like a bunch of fractals? Am I going to see a bunch of like animals and gods? And then they just like puke or shit for 5 to 12 hours. They get really disappointed and they feel like, maybe they didn't quite get what they were looking for. But I would say those who have an open mind and the flexibility to really be with the experience as it unfolds, they take away a tremendous amount. And it's about that reframe. What's going on here? Not trying to make sense of and interpret and figure it out, I think was something that a lot of people, especially from the West, try to do. Is like, they try to figure out what's going on in an ayahuasca ceremony.
Exactly.
Well, good luck with that.
It's sort of you get what you get when you give, like what you put in.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like if you're the type of person who has an open mind anyway, and you're going into something like that, I mean, you'll probably be able to get a whole lot more experience out of it than someone who's just like, ooh, I want to get really high. This is a drink that'll help me do that.
Exactly. And there's no, I don't think there's any shame in wanting that, but like if you're going in doing this sort of really important and like it's like a big ceremony and you're expecting to go into it and just get that, you really need to open your mind to the other things that you can get from it.
Yeah, because you have to say, like you said, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but you got to know what you're putting into your body, and this is not the type of thing for that. So,
well, it's cleaning.
Yeah,
it's cleaning. However, the body knows it needs to it essentially triggers something in the body that just needs to go, right? And whether that's emotional and psychological or mental, or whether that's physical, it's kind of like, well, what have you been holding on to for your whole life? What have you been not cleaning and not healing and maybe on some level suppressing? And this is where I love when the deeper you go with ayahuasca, the more you realize that you can't hide anything from a plant. Like you can't, and it's terrifying, but it's also very liberating because it's not like it's sitting there trying to bitch smack you through this process. It feels like it's they describe it as the grandmother, because the grandmother, she's holding you with love, she's holding you with gentleness, she cares about your well-being, and she's that safety, but she'll also isn't afraid to kind of bat you on the head when you feel like when she notices you're doing something really stupid. So it's that balance of that loving yet kind of authoritative relationship that I would say ayahuasca conveys so beautifully. And it's hard not to take something away from it. I just want to validate, though, I get it when people set expectations and really have a lot of invested in the experience, and they go there and it didn't meet some kind of expectation, and they have to unpack that happens too, and it can be very disappointing. So just allowing people to feel those feelings as well, and recognize that sometimes that's a part of the experience is talking about how you felt as the result of having expectations and those not being met.
Yeah,
so.
well, expect the unexpected. That's a good way of putting it. So.
Or just, I also just wanted to say, and maybe this is just kind of like a word to the wise, is some of these ceremonies, they'll combine what's called repe, which is a tobacco snuff. And whereas in many cases, I would say repe is something that helps with the ceremony, there is a 1 in 20 to 30 person reaction where you don't realize that you're addicted to tobacco, allergic to tobacco. So I mean, I guess just a word to the wise, kind of like a precaution, is if you are going to an ayahuasca ceremony, maybe just be aware if they use tobacco as part of the tradition, because sometimes they use it as a snuff, sometimes they use it as a liquid. They turn into a liquid and you drink it. And if you haven't ever used tobacco in your entire life, just have maybe do some research around whether you are allergic to it, because you might have a very challenging experience.
No, that sounds
Physically,
like a bad time.
Right? Yeah. It's awful. Like, some folks, they don't even drink the ayahuasca because somehow their body just can't process the tobacco, and they're incapacitated, and sometimes they their body does all sorts of things. And I would say, maybe in ancient times, let's just say like 200 years ago or something, that would have been a part of the ceremony, where it's kind of like, hey, tobacco's teaching you that maybe it's not time to drink ayahuasca. And I don't want to interrupt the indigenous wisdom that might be unfolding, but I would say, since we have access to tobacco in so many different contexts, if there's any way that you can, without experimenting and then getting addicted to tobacco itself, just having some ability to try it out and see how your body reacts beforehand, so that you're not going into a ceremony with absolutely no understanding of how you're going to react to this plant. Do you guys have any questions about, like, I don't know, like shamanism in general? Because that was one of the reasons I went to Ecuador, primarily, was to just have exposure to different styles of shamanism, different styles of ceremony, because there's hundreds of different traditions, there's hundreds of different ways to which ayahuasca is poured, or the ceremonies that are created around it vary quite a bit. So I don't know if that's something you guys are curious of.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I would consider definitely going to a shaman myself, because I've always been kind of interested in a guided experience like that. I don't know for ayahuasca or if it would be for something else. I'm sure that there are a lot in BC that I could probably scout out. I don't know if you know any personally, but I guess one question is, like, don't they have like sleeping pills there for anybody who wants to dip out of the experience? Because I remember I had a friend who saw a shaman in Tokyo, and they were doing ayahuasca, and a lot of people were getting like sick, and they just wanted to opt out of this experience by taking a sleeping pill. So was that also an option when they were there?
I don't think so. I definitely know what you're talking about, though. They use this as a protocol in psychedelic therapy. They'll have benzodiazepines.
Okay.
Yeah, they did not have that kind of thing, from my understanding. Maybe they did, and I just wasn't familiar. I would say the shamans in South America, at least where I was in Ecuador, I can't imagine they would want to kind of like create some degree of shutting down the experience. Like, they definitely had protocols, don't get me wrong. When someone's freaking the fuck out, and it happens, it does, it can trigger all sorts of really challenging traumatic experiences that sometimes just need to be released somatically. So like, someone's literally convulsing or screaming, it happens. Like, these are things that are not common, but they do occur, and they'll take them aside, and they have like a little care bed, and they'll sit the person down, and they'll have someone sitting with them, at least one or two people at all times. Sometimes the shaman will come over and do a little bit additional, what's called limpia, so cleaning. Sometimes they blow certain perfumes onto them, or they'll sometimes just like burn additional incense or sacred tobacco to help the person. Essentially, they view it as there's like a dark spirit attacking them, right? It's kind of like they're under attack, and in a way, they're just, all right, well, let's just get this person into a space where they can get cleaned of that, or the shaman can give them more individual attention, and they can pray for them and help them get to a place of where they're balanced again. And those types of protocols, which are applied, I've seen happen at least 4 or 5 times. Those types of protocols seem to be more of the traditional route, versus in the West, psychedelic therapy often it's with psychologists or researchers, and they're going to have access to benzos, and they're probably going to have no real no problem with giving somebody that to help shut down the experience. Maybe that's in some way helping, let's just say, not allow the experience to become more traumatizing. But I would argue that maybe that's something the person needs to go through, and not to unnecessarily shut it down unless they are of physical harm to self or other. That's a different story. But in many cases, maybe that person just needs to have a temper tantrum, and as long as they're not like actually physically getting in altercations, they're creating safety for that space, right? They're creating a permission for a person to feel into that anger, feel into that rage, feel into that fear, so
that's
maybe
really
it's
interesting.
ideal to have that in some cases.
Exactly.
That's all I'll say.
That's really interesting to sort of, because you think of from a very base level, when you think of something that's like almost like a therapeutic spiritual experience like this, you expect the emotions to be prioritized, being like care and comfort and things like that. But from this description, there's some really visceral, I guess what you would consider uncomfortable emotions that you need to go through, and it's all a part of the experience.
Yeah, you need to go feel through. Or there's a quote. It's something like you need to go through it. I can't remember. It's something along the lines. You need to feel those feelings as they come up. Like you really do. You really need to allow those experiences to be continued.
Yeah.
And not to get too deep into this, but that's kind of how complex trauma works. Is there's often an experience that was cut off. You weren't able to fully feel what you needed to feel, and then there's a kind of an inconsistency in your body in terms of like it almost doesn't know how to deal with it, so it stores it. It kind of just gets stuck, right? These emotions get stuck, sometimes in the organs, sometimes in the tissue. It's often it gets stuck in the body, and that's where ayahuasca, it is such a somatic experience, because it's allowing this stuff to come up in a way that typically the mind won't allow to happen, right? You don't want to feel all the pain that you've bottled up your entire life. There's no way the ego would see that as being ideal. So the ayahuasca has some sort of way, who knows how exactly, but it kind of bypasses that natural response to suppress.
Yeah, because we're all kind of taught to be, or well, society anyway teaches us to not really experience anger or sadness or anything. It's like, but actually experiencing it is like how you process it. I mean, there's obviously anger and sadness that can be unprocessed or processed in a very horrible way, like murderers or whatever, rapists, like anything like that. But that's the way that you don't get to that point is by processing it in a healthy way. And it's just like, you don't want to be bottling Satan, as Dean Dude would say.
And so I remember the quote. It's the way out. The way out is through. That's the quote. It's referring to how like you need to feel it to get through it, right? Yeah. And what you're speaking to, at least in part, is the shadow. And if you haven't heard of the Jungian shadow, it's this idea of what you're not. Most of what we experience, most of where our trauma is manifest, it's unconscious, and it shows up in all these different forms. Let's just say I refer to them as parts, but anyway, let's just say murderers and rapists and pedophiles, all of these people that on some level at some point in their life were just humans with normal human experiences, but then they experienced deep severe abuse, trauma, something that completely distorted their experience of reality, and then the inability to process what they went through, it becomes this unconscious underlying shadow experience, and then that is where the let's just say these really unexplainable psychotic tendencies come from. Is there's something there that they don't know how to express, and maybe on some level just couldn't receive love around. Anyway, this is a bit complicated, but like there's a certain point where they likely felt disconnected from, let's just say, connection to their caregivers or connections to other human beings, and then the result of that disconnect created beliefs. They created very strong, very I'd say unhealthy beliefs, but they've created very strong beliefs about this is how the world is, and then that gets internalized, and then as they get older, expressed in ways that they probably don't have control over consciously. So that's my 2 cents. I know that's a very controversial topic, but That's kind of the theory in terms of how the shadow operates below the surface, and you don't have control over it unless you're able to feel these things and process that trauma and heal it, really.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, like, especially in like the online space, and which is why I'm glad you're kind of considering going into that with a podcast and all that stuff. It's like so much toxicity exists online,
Yeah.
and like, I mean, I kind of even make a living off of talking about a lot of it with like all the YouTube drama stuff that I've covered. But you know, at the end of the day, like, I don't wish anything bad on anybody. Like, I hope everybody finds their like path in life and they don't, you know, get hurt or anything. You know, everybody should just process. Well, I don't want to say should, because everybody can just do things in their own way. I'm not like any sort of authority on the subject, but I find it a lot healthier to have these discourses and, you know, put it out there. It. So
sometimes just talking about things,
exactly.
venting things, it can bring that self-awareness to like how you're showing up, maybe in a way that you don't necessarily agree with. And yeah, I could go into a lot of different tangents, but I'm curious, where would we like to kind of, I wouldn't say wrap this up, but like focus. Where would we like to bring this back to focus? I was going into Ecuador. We were going into all these different dynamics around shamanism. We got into the dark, right? The shadow. And I think that is a really good jumping off point to talking about Fear and Loathing, actually. I think we built a really great context to folks who maybe don't understand what that movie's about, to kind of see where there is this underbelly of society that's being exposed, and really there's a light being shed on it. So
actually, yeah, I guess this is a good way to kind of wrap that up and then bring it on to our next subject. So, yeah, I guess any final thoughts on anything before we move on to Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas specifically?
You know, I don't think anything is super specific, but just like recognizing that ayahuasca is one of those things where even if you take something away from this experience, like, that seems interesting. At the same time, just doing your research, recognizing that for me at least, it took many years of just like trying to figure out where to go and how I felt about it, whether I even really wanted to do it, to make that informed decision, and just being patient with that process, not jumping into these things willy-nilly, even DMT, just really checking in with yourself, recognizing like, do I need to do a psychedelic right now? What's the right psychedelic for me? And yeah, just trying to create that safety for yourself first and foremost, I suppose.
Yeah, I love that.
So,
yeah,
be safe out there.
Yeah, and don't do what these two guys did that we're going to talk about here in just a second. But yeah, why don't we take a quick break, and then we'll head into Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Okay, welcome back. We are back from the break. I hope you guys stocked up, got your snacks, got your poppycorn, because we're going to talk about the movie now, which is always the feature presentation.
I mean, when I listen to a podcast, I just get my snacks and stuff while I'm listening to it.
I cook while I'm listening.
I don't stop and then just like, wait a minute, I need my cookies.
I need my Tim Tams.
Maybe if it's a really engaging part. Yeah.
But yeah, Ian, why don't you go ahead and introduce this movie?
Okay. So, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is a movie from 1999, I believe. It is directed by Terry Gilliam. It is based off the book Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas by Hunter S. Thompson. And when it came out, it was kind of a box office bomb. It eventually became a cult following and has become one of the more celebrated movies, not only in Terry Gilliam's legacy, but also just, I'd say, of the late 90s. Like, actually, no, I think it was 98, because...
98,
yeah. Because Gene Siskel reviewed this while he was still alive, so that makes more sense. Yeah, 98. So, yeah, this was a movie that I saw maybe when I was a teenager. I don't know if you and I saw it around the same time, Nathan.
I'm pretty sure we did.
But, like, the only thing... Like, I knew who Terry Gilliam was. I knew who Johnny Depp was. I did not know who Hunter S. Thompson was. And so, when I saw this movie originally, I was kind of like, okay, that's... I didn't really understand the full context of it. It's an interesting thing because when you watch Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and you don't know who Hunter S. Thompson is, it is a completely different
Yeah.
experience. And it's like, you could even see, like, okay, sure, there's like commentary here and there on like the war on drugs and all that stuff. But I mean, you don't really, unless you know like the type of manner where it's coming from and all that stuff, it kind of like you could see it as like a fun little buddy or road comedy movie or something like that. That's also very trippy, and
It's a movie you watch while you're high on
it's
acid.
hard to like to categorize. Yeah, I have seen this movie High on Acid before, and it is very much, it's true, a lot of the stuff that he's saying about, it's kind of funny because last year I went to Vegas for the first time, and my dad got pickpocketed on the Vegas Strip while after we were there only for like 30 minutes, and I was like, holy shit, everything he said was true. Like, this is the worst place for an acid trip. This is like the worst of America, the most greedy, vile, selfish place in the entire
Bad set and
country.
setting.
So I was kind of like,
Not the best set and
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So, but it is interesting because if you learn a little bit about Hunter S. Thompson and where he's coming from, I believe he was a farmer in Colorado, or he lived like off the grid, kind of.
Small town.
Do you know more about that, Brandon, off the top of your head?
I read his. There's a biography of him kicking around somewhere. I read some of that like maybe 3 or 4 years ago. But he was definitely a small town guy, right? Small town boy, and went to. I can imagine.
Yeah.
He's been to a city before, but this must have been for a small town boy growing up in like some kind of farmland. This must have been one of his favorite places to go, just because it's so fucking wild and crazy and extreme and different from what I'm sure his childhood was like.
Yeah.
It's a dream come true.
American dream, I would say.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. A savage look into the American dream. And so I'll admit that prior to this podcast, I didn't rewatch Fear and Loathing, partially because I was busy making the Irate Gamer video, which just came out yesterday, but also because I was, I know this movie pretty much front to back, and I also reread the book last year, and I rewatched the movie last year. So I was kind of like, it was a very convenient movie for us to pick this time because of like my schedule. But also, I'm just really happy to talk about it because this is one of those things where it's like we were getting earlier about like, the people who just want like a high or something when they get out of drugs, and then people who like find like a deeper, more visceral experience. And I think if you watch this movie before knowing who Hunter S. Thompson is, you kind of get like the first part of that was like, okay, this is just like a fun, trippy movie that's, funny and dark and has this commentary a little bit in it. But if you like really start to understand what it's saying and, all this stuff, then you really like delve deep into it, then it becomes a much more eye-opening experience. And I think there's a reason why this book has like lasted so long, like has had such a cultural impact over the years, just because of, I believe this was one of the introductions of gonzo journalism, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't he like the
maybe
founder of gonzo journalism, from my understanding?
I would say, yeah.
Yeah, but I think he might have done like a few magazine articles before this specific one. But then or was this originally published in a magazine? I'm kicking myself for not having this stuff.
Yeah, Rolling Stone magazine.
Yeah, Rolling Stone. Okay, yeah. And yeah, so much of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is really, showing us kind of the worst aspects of humanity and the worst aspects of America. And, I remember seeing an interview with Hunter S. Thompson where he's like kind of saying that, he realizes like how kind of fucked up America is, but he also feels like America is one of the only places where he could conceivably live in the world, being the type of person that he was and the type of things he liked to partake in, like guns and drugs and all that type of thing. So when you watch a movie like this, it's like, even though he's criticizing all these different aspects of America and the American dream and stuff, he's also not saying that he's above it, really. He's kind of saying, like, I'm rolling around in the mud with all you guys, as is my attorney, and, I'm just seeing things for what they are. And, I don't think that there's a better place to where you can see a lot of that fucked up, depraved shit than Las Vegas. So,
Yeah.
I mean, there's just so much of that kind of, I guess, comes through in the movie, but I don't think that it's like fully transparent until you kind of learn more about it. And there are movies like that, like Naked Lunch, which was also based off of an author who was getting high off of a pesticide.
Oh.
And if you learn more about the author in that situation, then it also helps you better understand the context between what the movie's saying and what a general audience member might say. And I think that's true of this too. And I think those themes in the book are a lot more blatant and in your face. Not that they weren't in the movie, but it's just that Thompson has this colorful way of writing and kind of like exposing everything. It's kind of, I've always kind of said like, this
and
is
the images too.
Yeah, I've always kind of said that like the visuals in the movie are amazing. The visuals in the book are even better, just because that's how colorful of a writer Thompson is, and like there's just so much of this that I don't know, like it takes a true visionary to put this onto the screen, which is why I'm glad they got Terry Gilliam. I know, Brandon, you said you saw the Rum Diary, and I think you said you liked it.
I could talk about that one too. But anyway, yeah. Good director then.
I haven't seen it, so I can't like say anything about. Yeah, well, he didn't direct the Rum Diary actually, but some of the criticisms I've heard from the Rum Diary is that it wasn't as well directed as Fear and Loathing, even though it has Johnny Depp and like he's playing the
same kind of archetype,
kind of Huntress,
right? Same sort of.
Because it's also based off of a Huntress Thompson book.
That's
and but like to get like this is one of those things. It's like there's so many different ways that this could have gone wrong. There's so many ways, and the other movie based off of Hunter S. Thompson is Where the Buffalo Roam, which I also didn't think was a very good movie. That one's with Bill Murray, and I guess with Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, like it took like something that's really hard to describe and put it onto film, and seeing like that onto the screen, like I have a huge appreciation for the book and I have a huge appreciation for the movie too, for both what they accomplish in different ways. But anyway, I'm kind of going off a little bit, so I'll let you two talk.
I'm curious. I've been actually reviewing some of me and Ian did quite an extensive amount of research around this movie and this book, because we were going to do an entire like video on this. So I'm just reviewing some of the topics that we had, some of the themes that we had from this document. There's a lot of different directions you could go, and I'm kind of curious, like, just based on some of the themes that we brought up, if you can remember any of them off the top of your head, where do you feel like we could start to unearth? Because man, it is a complex and I'd say very political movie with a lot of underlying themes that just you don't pick up at first, but then the more you start to kind of like almost analyze it, it's just like so many messages. It's insane actually how many messages.
Yeah, because this was all happening during the Vietnam War, when the Vietnam War was like really prominent, and here he's having this trip in Vegas and he's seeing all this like crazy shit, but he turns on the TV and all he gets are like these absolutely crazy reports of like what's going on in across the ocean or whatever. And that's also kind of true to what we're experiencing right now with the war on Russia and all that stuff, is that there's so much like fucked up depraved shit around us. But I mean, like, you look across, like, just seeing things on a global scale, even, as opposed to, I guess, a national scale, which I think is another big theme of this movie. It is this whole thing. It's very much a time capsule of the 70s and all of the shitty things that were happening in the 70s. And, it's really this thing where even describing it into themes and stuff like that, like, kind of the whole theme I think that Hunter S. Thompson was going for is how unfocused like a lot of this stuff is, like the American dream, like this stuff. It's like, do people really know what it means to achieve the American dream? Do people even really understand what the American dream is? Like, if you ask somebody who's following the American dream to even define exactly what that is, do you think you'd get this straight answer or even the same answer out of two people?
Which I have here as exposing the pursuit of excess that will, quote-unquote, bring a person happiness. So it's kind of like, we're searching for this thing, which, you know, the more you look at it, it's like, is that really what Americans are actually wanting? Or, I mean, it's what they're searching for, right? It's what they've been programmed and led to believe is going to bring them happiness, but just kind of exposing that and really just showing that maybe this pursuit of excess isn't really all it's, you know, all we've sort of imagined it to be, in a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and do we even have a clear idea on what we imagined it to be? It's like you could say that it's unfocused, but it's unfocused in a purposeful way. It's kind of showing the lack of focus within society and the lack of any sort of
Yo, if I could
you know.
if I could interject, what's your favorite scene? I want to get each of your favorite scenes, but seriously, because this movie is just so brilliant in conveying these novel, or I'm just gonna say, really fucked up scenes that it's just like you can't unsee. So I'm just kind of curious. Yeah, Ian, start with you. What was your favorite scene from Fear and Loathing Las Vegas?
Oh man, there's so many good ones.
And why? You gotta tell me why too.
Yeah, there's so many good ones. Like, I like the one where he goes to the conference and then he's like laughing and
The
like
War on
you know
Drugs
all that
conference,
stuff's happening.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh
the
my
War on
God,
Drugs
yeah.
conference. Like, it's so funny, but at the same time, it's like it really is like at the same time it's funny, but he's exposing all this stuff about the war on drugs and like the dichotomy between the propaganda of it, which was also really huge in the 70s because of the Vietnam War, and you know all this different things that he's like going into. Like, that's probably my favorite scene in the movie if I could pick one, but even then, like, there's so many great scenes. So I don't know. What about you, Nathan?
Honestly, well, first of all, I just wanted to say I watched this movie after taking a 100 milligram edible because again, I don't do hallucinogenics. That's probably the most I'm gonna do. And I think my favorite scene, the scene that affected me most, is probably the scene with Gonzo in the bathtub listening to Jefferson Airplane while
Damn it!
while.
I was gonna say that scene, man.
Oh my god!
All right,
It is so good.
Tell me about it. Tell me about it. Why?
Nothing. The whole movie has a lot. There's a lot of varying, like tones that are going on throughout the whole movie. As Ian said, it's unfocused, but in a purposeful way. And up until this point, there have been tense scenes, but this scene felt so built up. It felt like a bubble was about to pop at any moment in this scene. And I hadn't seen this movie for quite a while. I think, Ian, you're a little bit more knowledgeable on this one than I am. And not really knowing where these things go is like just watching how they are acting in this scene. It is so frantic and almost like alien how far gone
it's the breakdown,
they
man.
are at this point.
Yeah,
it is a full accurate breakdown of someone having the worst trip of their life, and it is incredible. And I think
you said it was the acid
also,
in combination with other things, but yeah, the acid.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I would say that scene and also the scene where Duke takes the adrenochrome in the hotel room is also an incredible scene. Just it captures the concept of having a bad trip and projects it in such a way that is so easy to understand, which is so funny because it's such a hard thing to convey. Visually, I would say it's very easy to come off as like, oh, you don't really know what you're talking about. They absolutely knew what they were talking about when they portrayed these trips on screen.
Yeah, that's the thing too, is like I first watched this movie when I was a teenager. That's before I did any sort of hallucinogens, and then when I did acid for the first time and I started to like look at carpets and stuff like that, I was like, holy shit, like the accuracy on this. I mean, I think Terry Gilliam probably did his fair share of acid.
I would argue it's...
but I mean, I don't want to project that onto him, but I kind of believe it. Yeah. And there's just so much of this is like so true to experience. I mean, I can't say that I've seen like lizard people coming out at me or anything like that, but the stuff that's heightened, it's heightened in a way that's like kind of funny, but there's also so much of this that feels very visceral and real at the same time.
I would argue it's done so accurately that it's likely triggering for folks who have had bad drug trips in the same way like a war veteran gets PTSD and essentially sees like a really well-made war movie, and they're kind of like, oh
Yeah.
no, because it's got that I don't know, that shock value in a way, but it's also very disturbing. Like, I love that you brought attention to that same scene. And I was gonna say it for other reasons as well, but those two scenes are very deeply disturbing. That's like kind of the word that comes to mind for me, and not you know, they're complex. It's not just like you're so disturbed. It's like it kind of disturbed that you can't look away. You're like, wow, this exists. How can so much chaos exist in one scene? It's just you're kind of drawn to it in a sort of weird, perverse way. And this speaks to the shadow. Actually, we were speaking earlier, is that we're in some sense we're drawn to this because there's a part of us that maybe just on some level is like, wow, that person has that darkness within them. That's vile, but at the same time, if you could be honest with yourself, we all hold some degree of innate darkness within ourselves. So it's kind of like we're being magnetized to this gruesome, disturbing experience, because maybe on some level it helps us kind of just feel like, hey, well, I can normalize the fact that sometimes I feel a little bit, maybe not Hunter S. Thompson-esque, but I feel a little bit, uncomfortable or disturbed, and it's like it's normalizing some of these low lows that these two gentlemen, these two men achieve. And I can say from the perspective of people who do use drugs, that's one of the most healing experiences you can witness. It's really helps you foster a deeper level of self-acceptance, and maybe on some level normalizes one of these dark trips that you thought was just like the most hellish experience on earth. Well, it's like, you know what, maybe it's just another aspect of the human experience, right? So
yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of funny because like this movie and then the Gaspar Noé movie Enter the Void, like I've always hear people bring them up when they're like talking about, oh, you should watch this when you're really high because it's so trippy. It's like at the same time it's like, I don't know, this is kind of making me not want to do drugs because it's just showing you like how fucking depraved everything is. Like it's like, yeah, exactly. And like it's just, I don't know, the best movie for LSD for me hands down ever was 2001: A Space Odyssey, but with something like this, like it's just showing you so much darkness and so much stuff that just comes out of drugs, comes out of humanity, comes out of greed, comes out of violence and all this different things, and it's showing you all this. At the same time, it's also really, really funny. Yeah. Like this movie and like the book are like really, really funny because it's like showing you that aspect of humanity too. That it's saying like,
you must have been having a fucking laugh riot. Seriously.
Yes.
I don't think I watched this movie. I watched this movie stoned for the first time, and I think I at some point, actually, interestingly, that what's it called? That White Rabbit scene. That was where I had to tap out because I started sobering up and I was like, what the fuck am I watching? What's going on? But it's like it took that scene, which is, by the way, dark, disturbing, but also just like so I don't know, just intense, that I kind of woke up and I was like, I think I need to turn this off. And then returning to this movie, like you have to keep on returning to this movie, whether it's in book form, whether it's just watching it a second time or a third time or a fourth time. It's like starting to notice all the themes that surface, because there's just so much jam-packed into every scene or into every few scenes that you really need to rewatch it to appreciate the brilliance of all the little nuances of it, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And like, as someone who really appreciates like a character-driven story, rather than just like one thing happening after another, I think that Duke and Gonzo are some really interesting characters, just based on the fact that they're going through the same drug experience, but they're both having. Of course, Raoul Duke is our main narrator, and everything sort of comes through his perspective. But it's just so interesting to see how these drugs affect and sort of bring out, I guess, as you said, the shadow, the Jungian shadows of these people as they start to let go of these egos. Yeah, and the real them starts to come out. And you see that Raoul Duke is... that there's this deep fear of other people while he's in this place, and this deep paranoia And with Gonzo, you see this like angry, almost like villainous persona come out of him whenever he's on these drugs, and it's like this is really a representation of who they really are in this case.
It's ugly, man.
Yeah.
Like one of my favorite scenes is when they're in the elevator, and then like Gonzo takes out his knife and like he starts threatening them, and then like somebody opens the door, and then he just starts kind of waving his arm. It's so funny because it's like you see all his visceral anger coming out of him, but at the same time he doesn't even really know what's going on. He just kind of knows that they're sort of vaguely insulting him, and that sets him off into like this, just fueled rage. And it's just, I know that Johnny Depp, whenever he was preparing for this movie, he spent a lot of time with Hunter S. Thompson in order to get his performance right. And the person who Gonzo's based off of, that's a real person, but like that was his alias. I forget his real name off the top of my head. I don't know if you have it in your notes, Brandon.
Not his attorney. Yeah, Oscar Zeta Acosta. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So he went missing, I think a couple years after this movie. Like, he just vanished. And the theory that people have brought out is that, he was probably in, like, some sort of fight in Mexico and he got killed or something. And so the performances of these main two people, like Johnny Depp as Duke and then Benicio del Toro as Gonzo, like, they are fucking amazing. Like, it is such a strong performance. And I think Johnny Depp gets... Yeah,
sober.
exactly.
Yeah.
Whole movie.
Yeah.
That's something...
How do you, like, act sober like that? And,
It's wild.
And Johnny Depp rightfully gets a lot of praise for this role in this movie. I don't think Benicio del Toro gets nearly enough praise for his role, because, like, he is fantastic.
I don't say it lightly. These guys were acting their asses off. Like... just absolutely embodying these characters.
Can I bring up something? I actually want to share about my favorite scene, but before I do, this came up. I dressed up as Raoul Duke as a Halloween costume, which I'm sure many people have, but I did this probably about 4 years ago, and I did it at a rave. Right, so I went to a rave as Raoul Duke,
wow.
Fucking Hunter S. Thompson, and it was great. I had the fly swatter, I had the media press badge, I had the whole outfit going on, and I was sober. I went there sober, and 95% of people at this Halloween rave were not sober, and then I was just, like, acting, like I was just, like, like, gong showed, like, just falling over. I was, like, doing the voice. I would be, like, using some role, like, references, quotes from the movie, and people were like, what are you on? I'm like, I'm sober. They're just like, oh my god. And I was gonna tell you, I had so much fucking fun just pretending to be Raoul Duke. So just give me a bit of perspective. I'm sure Johnny Depp and extension, what's his name?
Benicio del Toro.
Benicio del Toro.
They must have had a fucking riot. Like, honestly, as much as it was also very challenging, right, to portray these characters, especially in the darker places. I can imagine doing the scene where they're in the psychedelic circus, let's just call it the carousel, when they're being led into the circus. That shit must have just been a fucking riot. It must have been like their inner child, right? There must have just been like, this is I get to do this? Like, it's kind of one of those roles where I'm sure Johnny Depp had a lot of fun, as much as I don't know. It does feel like the darkness of it could have also been. I don't know how much you guys analyze actors, but how much the darkness of this role also could have been. There could have been some sort of impact on him psychologically after, potentially. I don't know. That's just something I'm throwing out there. He has to on some level undergo a post-role integration of a character so intense like this.
Yeah.
I think Johnny Depp has had much more traumatic experiences since this role, but
sadly,
I do definitely agree with a lot of what you just said in terms of the way that they all kind of they probably had a lot of fun on it, and the whole thing with Terry Gilliam, the director, he got his start doing the animated segments in Monty Python, and so he when he kind of like started doing more of his film work in movies like Brazil and 12 Monkeys and stuff like that, like you can see like the dark comedy kind of come over and translate into something else like this. And I feel like, when you watch these scenes, like, they're really trippy and they're really animated, and they do kind of, in a weird way, they bring me back to that Terry Gilliam Monty Python style, which was, very surrealistic, very this weird stream of consciousness. And I can't think of a better person to kind of helm this than him in this situation, because I think he just understands this material on such a deep level.
Yeah,
it's a trip.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they're recreating a trip,
Yeah.
and it's clear that how do you convey what's not just an acid trip or a cocaine trip, but this melding, this splicing together of, like, uppers, downers, laughers, screamers, like, as they describe everything. It's like they were combining all these things that on their own probably create quite a interesting surreal experience, but then you combine 5-6 different things, then you throw ether in the mix, then you fucking on top of that, what's actually happening in the reality is pretty fucked up too. It's kind of like who knows if their actual lived experience was anything actually like the movie, but they did their absolute damnedest, I'm sure, as Hunter S. did his damnedest, to really track the vital components that could give you insight into what he was living. But who knows what was going on up there, like in his head, versus what was being personified externally. So that's another whole interesting idea, is like what was his actual lived experience like, because they probably got as close as humanly possible to conveying it, but probably only just got to the the surface of it, really. Yeah,
Well, a lot of what Hunter S. Thompson said with the book is that there are parts of it that are true, there are parts of it that are made up, and there are parts of it where he doesn't know if it was true or made up. So it was like it's that really does kind of play into, like, the idea of this. And when people go to, like, a movie, or even to an extent when they read a book, they're probably looking for a structured experience and stuff like that, and that's probably a big reason why this movie failed upon release. And it didn't get very good reviews. It totally bombed at the box office, and a large part of that is just like, how do you describe this? How do you market this? How do you bring this type of thing into the public eye? And this is. But I'm sure that there were people in 1998 where we're just like, okay, this is going to become a masterpiece years down the line. And, lo and behold, it's considered to be one of the greatest movies of the late 90s. And I don't disagree at all. And I think the book is one of the greatest books I've ever read.
Can I also comment that
Yeah.
at that point in history, maybe it was a niche, right? Like maybe the type of person that he was appealing to was more niche or more underground. But nowadays, I would say it's pretty much, I won't say everybody, but it's probably expanded that niche to pretty much be so much more relatable and so much more common. So at the time, maybe it was kind of like he's just right into the rebels, the underbelly, those who are really on some level pushing the edge of consciousness. And then nowadays, it's like, hey, I'd have to say that's probably about 70-80% of people in general. Debatably, there's a larger percentage.
Yeah, for real.
So,
yeah. And actually, now that you bring that up, I remember what I was trying to think of before when it came to Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which was that this was the second book that he wrote after Hell's Angels about him joining the biker gang and going into... Yeah, I still haven't read that either. But, so, like, I think a lot of people, when they first met Thompson, it's like they thought he was just kind of like an insane drug addict, and he is. But at the same time, it doesn't mean he doesn't have a lot of great insight. And, it's just... He manages to take the most dark and depraved things you can really think of or even visualize, or even stuff you can't even visualize, and he manages to, like, describe it in such a poetic and kind of strangely beautiful way, and I would say that also translates onto the screen.
Yeah.
He was a poet, absolutely, and not just any poet. I'd say he had this, like, pre-Bukowski-esque capacity to convey society in a poetic fashion that I would say he's one of a kind. Like, that's the thing. It's like, as much as he was, the fact is he used a tremendous amount of drugs, and he probably isn't the person that most of us would look up to as a role model. But that being said, the dude was one of a kind, and like writers especially look up to this dude like he's like going down to history, you know, a legend. And I guess it makes sense if you actually get to know him. Let's just say in the way that he wants you to get to know him versus you know, I would say it's easy to misrepresent who this character is, who this individual is, who this complex person is. And that's what I'd say is been for me at least very beautiful is getting to know whom this person, this Dr. Hunter S. Thompson actually was underneath of all these essentially demonizations of the archetype of this what they call the seer, you know, sees. He's just looking at stuff. He's a journalist. He's just looking at stuff and seeing it authentically in a way that you kind of can't sugarcoat it, right? You can't. How are you gonna sugarcoat Hunter S. Thompson when he doesn't sugarcoat the world? He's just seeing it how it is. It's authentic. It's real.
Yeah, and I think so much of oh, sorry, I let Nathan go because you and I have been talking a lot. Brendan, so.
I was just gonna say that I think it's really interesting that he's a seer. He observes everything that comes in front of him, but for the real purpose, I guess it's debatable what the real purpose of this trip to Vegas is, but in the end, the trip was for him, I believe, to cover a motorcycle race, which he never sees and he never knows the winner of, and it's just a whole non-thing in comparison to this drug-fueled bender that he's going on with Gonzo, and it's like a non-thing, and you get one scene, and then it's just you don't even need to think about that anymore. It's not important.
What a beautiful metaphor, though. Life kind of just took over, you know?
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Like
because I believe that the reason he got funding to go to Vegas is because he covered the Kentucky Derby previously in like a magazine or something, and so he got paid by Rolling Stone to go to Vegas and kind of report on the race, and it turned into this basically. Which was pretty amazing. But like it's, you know, we in society, I think in general, like we have so many people, you know, they stereotype drug addicts or even like, you know, sex workers and stuff like that, which is not what this movie's about. But this whole kind of thing of like, you know, people, they say they look up to Hunter S. Thompson. At the same time, he doesn't really come across as a role model. It's just that, you know, you just to see somebody who completely understands this because he's willing to go down to their level and roll around in the mud with people. You know, not in like a adversational way, but like just in a way of like, okay, I know I'm fucked up. I know you're fucked up, and you know I'm just gonna report on how fucked up everything is. And you know, there's a great quote from Hunter S. Thompson, which me and Brandon have brought up before, which is, "I hate to advocate drugs, alcohol, violence, or insanity to anyone, but they've always worked for me." And that's kind of how I feel about, you know, that's really kind of sums them up in a very good, kind of quick and funny little, quote. So.
Yeah. No, it's really it's an incredible movie to go into, especially if you're going into it with an open mind and really just perceiving it perceiving it for what it is. I think it's a lot like what you were talking about before, Brandon, is you get from this movie what you put into it. It's very much about your own preconceptions about these people and what they're doing and what they're perceiving on their end. That really sort of solidifies the experience to you by the time the credits roll. It's a really incredible movie to watch. How deeply
you're willing to engage with it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Which is why I took an edible beforehand, because I knew that I wanted to open my mind here. I didn't want to have any preconceptions going in. I just wanted to meld into it, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what? I'm still racking my brain here. I think aside from that one scene with the White Rabbit song, and I think for me it was just the iconic like circus scene when they were going into the circus and they were being let in, and it's kind of like you know, yeah, something about how much fun that seemed. I suppose, like, on some level, the movie gets dark for sure. It gets dark. It gets real. But that felt to me like it was still kind of like the light and joyful, kind of like the come up, right? Like, it's kind of like this entire movie's like a trip, basically. It's like there's the come up, and everything's kind of like still suspended in a kind of fantasy. I like to use the word psychedelic circus because that's how they sort of refer to many different psychedelics, but especially ayahuasca. Is like you're still in the psychedelic circus phase, where it's all just kind of like a show. It's all kind of just like fireworks and spinning and geometry and lights. But once that goes away, it's like the real dark starts to surface. The darkness, the shadow work is really when you start to sit with all that gunk, all that, disturbing, on some level traumatizing stuff that I don't know. I'm curious. Do you think they actually let go of it? Because that ideally there's a point of release, right? Like so it all comes up. It freaks you the fuck out. You're in it. It's real. You're reliving it. And then ideally, at least if you were to compare this to an ayahuasca ceremony, you're just puking in it. You're releasing it. You're purging it. You're letting it all go. It's getting sometimes released to the fire. Sometimes it's being released to the elements. And now in this movie, I don't know how much he actually gets to the point of letting go of some of this darkness. He kind of just, on some level, still has to internalize, and kind of just, it almost ends abruptly, where it's kind of like, well, guess we gotta let all the darkness still just kind of stew in the pit of it for a little bit longer.
Yeah, he's just a freak in the freak of nature
kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, just one of God's own prototypes, as they say.
Yep. Great quote.
And that's how I would describe Hunter S. Thompson, too.
Too weird to live, too rare to die.
Yeah, yes. Absolutely. But just an incredible movie. Like just a treat for the senses, sober or inebriated, honestly. Like, absolutely, like a tour de force, I guess, if I want to be generic. It's really incredible. Honestly, one of my favorites.
Yeah, and it's a very. Even though I didn't rewatch it like recently for the podcast, I would have totally.
I did.
I mean, like, I have no problem turning this on like all the time, like, and revisiting this. And I would say the same for the book, because like that wasn't my first time reading the book; it was probably my third. And it's just, there's so much to get out of something like this, even though like. It's kind of like the whole thing about Vegas, of it being like on the surface kind of this bright and welcoming place, and then it's kind of the same thing I'd say with this story in a weird way, is that like there's so much surface level stuff that you may or may not necessarily be able to grasp on a first watch or a first read, but once you really like delve into like the psychology and like the political stuff and all these different points that they're making about society, I mean, it really can be an extremely rewarding experience that's as funny as it is dark and fucked up.
Yeah,
it appeals to both sides.
Yeah, another thing I wanted to say is this isn't really as much about the themes of the movie. I think all the guests or I guess the other actors in this movie who show up in like minor roles all do amazing jobs. I when you were talking about your favorite scenes, another one of my favorite scenes is just the opening driving scene coming into Vegas, where they pick up the hitchhiker, where they pick up, which I absolutely did not remember that was Tobey Maguire when I first watched this movie.
No, me either. No,
really?
Not at all.
Really?
Yeah. No, when I first watched this movie, I didn't even pay attention. There was, we had, Tobey Maguire is the hitchhiker. Christina Ricci was Lucy, which was a really uncomfortable scene. Gary Busey was the cop that pulls over Raul during I think the second half of the movie, who was honestly one of the funniest scenes of the movie, where he pulls him over and he asks him for a kiss. It's like it really does feel like the world gone crazy with characters like this.
Yeah, absolutely. Cameron Diaz makes a cameo too.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of really good Yeah, just just people that like, you know, they absolutely didn't have to get just like guest stars, but they did anyway, and it actually makes it better.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I might bring attention to something that came about from me rewatching the movie, probably for the fourth time or something, but for sake of doing research, I started using the captions and started to notice, especially towards the, let's just say the latter half of the movie, some of the things that were being said. Like how he quotes Timothy Leary at one point, and I have the quote somewhere here
Yeah.
ad verbatim, but it was like so much of what he was saying in his commentary, it was just it was prolific. But if you get too caught up in the intensity and the excitement of the movie itself, and you don't have captions on, it's hard to capture. It's hard to capture all the little nuggets of wisdom and commentary that are being introduced that only a journalist, especially one like Hunter S. Thompson, can really speak to and encapsulate so beautifully. So I just, if you haven't watched the movie with captions on, I really recommend it. There's some juicy stuff towards the second half that are just kind of jump out at you. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure.
I'm one of the, I don't know, I feel like I'm weird this way, but I'm someone who likes to watch every movie with subtitles.
No, I
because
am too.
I feel like I get more out of the script when I do.
Yeah, I do.
I know a lot of people are like, oh, the subtitles are distracting, and it's like, no, they're not. They're making me understand and appreciate this so much more.
I've got audio processing issues, so like if we started this movie without captions, and I was like, okay, 15 minutes of this movie, I don't understand a single thing Johnny Depp has said. This edible is starting to hit. I gotta turn subtitles on.
I kind of feel called to share the Timothy Leary quote that I was referring to, just because it is so haunting, and I feel like it was in some sense Hunter S. Thompson or Raoul Duke, whomever you want to refer to in that context, was hinting at something that is almost like the underlying premise of the movie that you can't pick up unless you're really I just say dialed into the whole political atmosphere surrounding the movie. So it's like, so Hunter S. Says towards the end of the movie, we're all wired into a survival trip now. No more of the speed that fueled the 60s. That was the fatal flaw in Timothy Leary's trip. For all those people who took him seriously, who thought they could buy peace and understanding for $3 a hit, but their loss and failure is ours too. What Leary took down with him was the central illusion of a whole lifestyle that he helped create. A generation of permanent cripples, failed seekers, who never understood the essential old mystical fallacy of the acid culture, which is the desperate assumption that someone, or at least some force, is tending the light at the end of the tunnel. It kind of a little bit bleak, but so telling of the state of America and LSD, the sort of controversy with LSD and what was left. What was left after the acid culture? What happened after that, right?
Yeah. Everything was...
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we have to live with it. I mean, all of us do, obviously. But it's like, it felt to me like this, in some level, does... maybe, in some level, maybe I just wanted to tie back to my whole concept of harm reduction and just looking at this whole world that we're in right now. It's kind of like this was almost like a prelude in some way to the chaos that psychedelics have the capacity to spark and initiate. And now we're looking at this world that is pre-LSD, all these different psychedelics. Even on some level, we're past the point of even just a small group of people drinking ayahuasca. A lot of people most people, in fact, have probably used psychedelics, and just recognizing what that does to society overall, what that has done to society overall. And it's not necessarily a good or a bad thing, but just recognizing the shift in consciousness. It's deep, it's real, it's lasting, it's still going on. Like, what's the next 30, 40 years going to look like? I don't know. But can't go back to the pre-psychedelic time. How could you possibly know?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we just became way more experienced with that type of thing.
Numb to it too.
There's
a little bit,
yeah, pretty much.
Nothing surprises us anymore.
And
pretty much.
We're basically,
that's where a lot of this addiction stuff comes from.
No, we're basically numb to this this concept of terrible things happening. Like often, like when we're talking about this current generation of younger people, just sort of numb to having to live through a major historical event every couple of months. It's overwhelming, and with all the stuff happening all over the world, it's no wonder that these people would turn to something like this and want to numb that pain.
Yes.
But yeah,
or find meaning.
It's really telling. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's
maybe on some level, this is kind of how we started thinking about the movie when we initially did our research. Is like maybe he was just exposing the fact that it's all just on some level smoke and mirrors. It's like all right, so America's has a deeper purpose, right? Everything is as it should be. There's a reason why, right? So let's kind of test that theory. Let's see how much of this is really actually deeply purposeful and meaningful. And in a sense, he exposed the reality that it isn't really. On some level, it's kind of just a big show. It's a big performance, and when you start to actually get to the core of it all, it's kind of empty. And I'm not trying to be reductionist, but Las Vegas, man, all this song and dance on some level does have a lot of pain and suffering and emptiness underneath of it, or in the root.
Yeah, I agree. As somebody who was in Vegas for less than a day, it was pretty abhorrent what I saw.
Yeah, and also to have compassion for the fact that based on this sense of emptiness, maybe we're all hyper-fixated on something that isn't actually bringing us happiness. Yeah, I actually genuinely believe Dr. Hunter S. Thompson was trying to wake people up for sake of actually finding some degree of authentic happiness within their life. Trying to get them away from the fake and into the reality of how they can find meaning in their life or something like that. I mean, it's a bit of assumption, right? Heavy-handed assumption, but I do genuinely believe that, yeah.
Well, again, a lot of that does come from, if you know Hunter S. Thompson's background of, like, living in Colorado and kind of a remote life. I mean, this is kind of like... It doesn't really get into that stuff with the movie so much, but I believe he was married and had kids at the time he went on this Vegas trip, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow.
And... you would never even,
yeah.
you would never even think that, like, watching it, because it just seems like such like a capsule.
Married man, American, responsible, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, in his own way, he was already kind of living the American dream, but to kind of, yeah, it's just so much of this is like, and that's I think kind of the value of delving into these darker subjects just in general, like not even just pertaining to what he talks about in this movie, but just generally speaking, is that, if you realize how fucked up the world can be, you can also have a greater appreciation of how loving it can be when those kind of things happen, or like how peaceful it can be, or just the universe, or God, or whatever you want to attribute that to. Yeah. And yeah, exactly. So like so much of and that's why I do like these movies that kind of explore these darker subjects, because it does, or just pieces of art in general, because it does kind of show you, like, okay, this stuff is going on in the world. What can we, even if there's no definitive what are we going to do about it, but just on a personal level or on a global level, finding that inner happiness within you. There's so much value to seeing that. It's like if you see how dark it can be, I don't think you can truly appreciate how great it can be too. And so it's a lot of I think having, I guess, value for the things around you, and because so much of what we're going through, even now with politics and stuff like that, so much of it is just propaganda and stuff like that. So it's all about, I guess, on a deeper level, I think what this movie kind of goes into, or what Hunter S. Thompson goes into, is kind of how, I guess, he operates in this type of world, or, how, other people can operate in this type of world. So, in a weird way, there's a lot of hope that comes from something like that, where...
it's about hope. Yeah.
The world... yeah, situation that led to America and whatever allowed him to thrive and become successful. And in a weird way, he got the American dream after this book came out and became a huge hit. But it's just not... he kind of got it after he realized how fucked up and
ironically,
one-sided the American dream is. Yeah.
I'm curious. Do each of you want to maybe give like I won't say a guess, but like your interpretation of what the message of this movie might be, just like in a couple words? Do you feel like that's possible to encapsulate? If so, just kind of like maybe it was a little bit what you're speaking to Ian there with the hope, or what would you say the meaning or the message of this movie might be? Sorry, do Ian. Go.
Yeah, let's start with Ian.
Okay,
if you want, if you feel like you can at this point, yeah.
I was gonna pass it off to Nathan, but yeah, okay, I'll go. Okay, all right. You want to do it that way?
It's
on the hot seat.
I guess it's really about the nature of when the film starts. It's very much about the nature of finding the American dream. That's what they talk about, and I guess by the end of the movie, it feels like a much more personal, internal journey than anything. It really feels like through the experimentation with all these drugs and delving deep inside themselves, it's really a movie about looking within yourself for your own personal identity rather than relying off of society's idea of what your identity should be. It free from that society.
Yeah.
Being it sounds a little corny, but it really does feel like a movie about self-expression and being true to what makes you rather than buying into this system that is churning out like failure and misery everywhere you look. It's really just about
in a phony way too, right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
That's what I would say.
Because the thing is, like, there's an alternate universe where Hunter S. Thompson was he went to Vegas and he only covered this motorcycle race.
Yeah.
And it's just like,
ever.
There's like an alternate reality where that exists. And it's just like, could you imagine like what we'd be missing out on if that was the case?
Yeah.
Yeah. Could you imagine like all the untapped potential of like all these deep themes we're going into? It's like, if he just went there and did what he was supposed to do as according to Rolling Stone, like, he didn't let even just having the fact that he had an assignment or like professionalism or
his job
any sort of
in general.
inhibitions he might have had, he didn't let that stop him.
But just to clarify what Nathan, you were saying there, it's just the message or the advice to, let's just say the listener, if you will, is just be yourself. Be your most authentic expression of you, regardless of all the fuckery that tells you shouldn't. Just be you.
Yeah.
And that is beautiful. I love that takeaway. I feel like that's a really good message to receive from the movie. Yeah.
And again, that's just my own personal interpretation, because I think this is definitely one of those movies where you could take away a totally different idea. I personally am a very optimistic person, so I think I would definitely come to that conclusion. But I think if you showed this to somebody who had a very much more pessimistic view, I think they'd come out with a completely different message.
Absolutely. It is interpretive, and just to shift the focus, if you have something now, what would you say is the message of this movie? Almost like the takeaway or the advice that they might be trying to kind of impart upon the viewer or the listener.
Well, I don't know if there's necessarily advice that the movie is giving, or like that Hunter S. Thompson is giving, but it is kind of the message. I would say is I agree with a lot of what Nathan said about like kind of like the fucked up, parts of society and what you're expected to do, and you can either be a part of the fucked up society, or you could go against it, or you could just be fucked up in your own way. And maybe that sounds dismissive, and it's not. I don't mean to be dismissive. I'm just saying that like there's so much in this world where it's like, you'd look down on someone like Hunter S. Thompson if it was just like a random person on the street. Yeah. But if you look, because he you were able to kind of look into him, like a lot of people saw
It's
his
easy
inner
to
brilliance
judge.
and stuff
Easy
like
to judge
that.
a character like him.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. And like you can see that so much of like people on their pedestals, you know, judging, you know, homeless people, judging drug addicts, judging
Absolutely.
prostitutes, judging like all
Yeah.
these different things. Like these people who are,
Don't be so
you
quick to
know,
judge.
they find their own way
Might
to
that be-
live their
might be-
lives.
Might that be part of the message? Is don't be so quick to judge, or is there?
I wouldn't say that's part of the message. I'd say it's more like being careful about the judgments that you make and like really looking in yourself
Be honest.
to see.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it's kind of like that quote of like, judge not lest ye be judged. And like, a lot of people take that quote to mean like, oh, what they're really saying is that you shouldn't judge anything. And it's not about not judging anything. It's just like, if you're going to judge something,
Know
judge
why,
it carefully.
maybe.
And, you know, actually understand what you're judging here. And,
Yeah.
you know, that's, I'd say like, yeah, it's
like
kind
that.
of like, it's showing you this darker side. And it's not saying like, oh, you know, this is, you know, even though it's like, you could argue that it's being very pessimistic and downtrodden, I think that a lot of this is just kind of like, okay, well, you can try to change it or you can try to live with it. You can interpret how you respond to this, but this is the way it is in a lot of ways, and you don't really see that from someone who is looking down on everybody and, you know, kind of thinks they're calling the shots and stuff like that. I mean, yeah, this is someone, you know, Hunter S. Thompson was not in a position of power, and I don't think he would necessarily want that, because I think that the way that he approached things was just like, you know, you look up at someone, you see God, you look down on someone, you see the devil, you look right at someone, you see yourself.
Yeah.
And that's how I kind of see this, and
Nice.
I think, yeah, that's
Yes.
kind of how, like, I interpret a lot of this, is just like, you know, being on the same level as a lot of other people, and yeah, maybe it's like dark and fucked up, and it'll show you society, parts of society you don't necessarily
It's
want to
honest.
see, but at the same time, yeah, it's about, I'd say, honesty in a weird way, you know. As,
Sorry, I want to point out one thing you were saying about, and he doesn't have, like, let's just say the traditional role of a leader or a politician, but he certainly has power, man. That's what I find is very beautiful about who he is as an individual, is because as a journalist, as a celebrity journalist, he actually has quite a tremendous amount of power. But I think compared to most folks, he actually wields that power in, I would say, quite a intentional and, I want to say, blanket term to say responsible, but I think he has a very conscious approach to how he utilizes that power and where he puts that focus, where he chooses to essentially focus that lens. Because, you know, being a journalist, with the degree of following he had, I can imagine there's a lot of ways he could have been corrupt. There's a lot of ways he could have been corrupted. But I don't know. I question whether that is the case with this individual. He doesn't really seem like the type of person. He is corrupt, right? He's not a freaking angel. He's not, you know, he's corrupt in ways, but the degree of being corrupt by politicians feels like he's relatively unscathed, or at least he's so self-led. He's so in his own, I don't know, in his own process. Feels like he's able to be free. Like, in a sense, he's kind of conveying a sense of being free of political corruption. I mean, that's a huge assumption to make based on me not necessarily understanding much about his political takes, but you never know. I like to think that he's wielding this power in a way that's for the people. That's kind of more what I'm saying. And last thing I would like to say is, if I could take a swing at this, what is the meaning from this freaking crazy ass, brilliantly written movie? What's the message? I kind of like this idea that you kind of just gotta put your keys in the accelerator and fucking put the gas pedal on as fucking hard as you can and just see where life takes you. It's kind of like there's a bold kind of fuck it mentality, which taken to the extreme is harmful for sure, but at the same time, you know, the adventure that he goes on, the willingness to push it to the edge, the boldness to just explore and go into the depths of an experience and really commit to it fully, that to me feels like that's such a powerful message. Is just take the fucking trip. Just go on the fucking adventure. Just see where it takes you. Might be a fucking shit show. Might take you to the deepest, darkest place that you weren't ready to go to. But the psychedelic journey is kind of like that. You buckle in. You take the substance. It's like, as Terrence McKenna says, take it easy. but take it. Like,
But take it, yeah.
take the substance. Put, accept the call from God in a way. So I mean, that was kind of my general takeaway, is like, wow, he actually decided this is his mission. For what, who knows how he reached that conclusion, but he did it. He went on the journey. Something came about from it, and he survived. Which is pretty wild, and it's inspiring.
He survived for decades, actually, until he shot
Yeah.
himself because he was deteriorating in health. But
It's unfortunate.
Yeah.
yeah,
But you know what?
Even
he,
then, like,
he went out on his own
you know,
terms.
yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna say. It's like I can only imagine someone like Hunter S. Thompson going out on their own terms.
Yeah, you could
Yeah,
never. I
so-
would never see him.
I mean, not that I'm condoning
Yeah, let's just be
suicide
clear.
or
Let's
anything
be
like
clear.
that. I mean,
Hunter S.
if you're-
Thompson
yeah, exactly.
having some introspective appreciation for the autonomy of taking your own life is not, I would say, generalized or a universal perspective. I agree with.
Yeah,
But-
no.
yeah,
No,
he-
it just.
I know, but like I could.
From an
At the same
artistic
time, it's like
standpoint.
one of those things where it's like I wouldn't recommend this to anybody, but it does work for me. That's like
Exactly.
the idea of the Hunter S. Thompson in his own mind, and
Appreciate
it's like
him.
I'm not
Yes.
saying that like it's a.
No,
yeah,
I'm not saying you were
exactly.
either.
I'm not. Yeah, exactly. I know you're not, but I just want to make it absolutely clear to anybody listening that they get like what we're saying, because that's a very
I
sensitive
could go into that topic a lot.
Yeah,
It's just-
absolutely.
Yeah,
like,
it's a very serious
if
topic.
anyone,
yeah.
if anyone ever had a thought like that, we would never want to make anyone think that that is the option. I just think that, again, Hunter S. Thompson is one of God's own prototypes, and he was above. He was on a different level, and I think it's very interesting to think about how his mind works. And it's just, I couldn't really imagine anyone like him going out any other way. Is the thing.
Could I just sort of, I feel called to kind of make a bit of a statement. If anyone
Yeah.
on this podcast is having challenges with their mental health and is in crisis and is having thoughts of suicide, just know that there are resources. You can call crisis lines. There are many different free services that you can reach where it's accessible. And 1-800-SUICIDE is one in Canada, but just so you know that there are very highly trained professionals there. The people that care, even just reaching out to somebody in your life. But if it's too hard to do that, sometimes having the anonymity of a crisis line is really helpful. And I volunteered at them myself, and I really highly recommend just reaching out. And maybe you don't talk about suicide. Maybe you just talk about how you're feeling and what it feels like to be in that hopeless state. And it's just sometimes you just need to be witnessed in that. So I just wanted to kind of speak to that a little bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that's one thing with the world, is that I think we're becoming a lot more aware of mental health issues and stuff like that, but there's still a stigma around them. And, there's just, not to go on too much of a tangent about this, but there's just so much about society that we're still...
That might be a topic for another
even though,
time.
like, we're a little bit more... Yeah, even though we're a lot more aware, we're also a lot more divided, because there's some people who just... Yeah, they do not like to think about these type of things, and it's like, it's okay if you don't want to, like, talk to anybody, but, like, I don't know, before you make any drastic decisions like that, I definitely think that you should maybe explore some other options.
Whatever that
Yeah,
looks like for you,
absolutely.
100%. It doesn't have to
Yeah.
look like speaking about your feelings. There's so many different ways. Anyway, the last piece I wanted to speak to before I'm assuming we're closing up, is we
we're
spoke a
wrapping
lot
up soon.
to ayahuasca ceremonies. We spoke a lot to psychedelic harm reduction, and I just really feel like it's important to recognize that sometimes these spaces aren't safe, and it is really, really important that you do your research, do your due diligence, and maybe go to a place that has a reputable, shaman, or someone has some sort of reputation, so that you're able to create that safety for yourself. Don't put yourself in harm's way for sake of exploring a psychedelic experience. There really is a lot of great ceremonies. There's a lot of great retreats. There's a lot of great space holders out there. You just have to just do a little bit of research and build that relationship.
Yeah. And that's another thing too, like we were saying about how we don't necessarily condone drug use or anything like that, but it is this thing, it's like,
Be responsible.
if you're going to do it and like you've absolutely set your mind on doing it, like do it, be very careful, because like this is something where, that's a lot of like the people you see who are really fucked up. They don't take the precautions. They're just like, ooh, crack cocaine. What is this gonna feel like? And it's just like that's just. Yeah, just kind of know what you're getting into before you inject something into yourself, or like you have any sort of experience like this. Like the only and it's very pertinent to talk about it while we're bringing up Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, because it's like a lot of this is not necessarily advocating this type of behavior of like these drug trips, these like going to Vegas, these like pulling out your knife in an elevator, taking a bath next to a toaster. Like this is not like an advocation of any of that, but like all this stuff that you could definitely see as being really fucked up. It's like there's a certain awareness that you can have about it without it totally overtaking and consuming your life, and I think that that's a very important thing.
Speaking to what you're saying, I think the media, for sake of various reasons, they sensationalize drug use, and this is a pretty clear example of where at a time where maybe a lot of people weren't using drugs, they were kind of creating something of a perspective around it. Now, is that the only thing you take away from this movie? By no means. It's so complex. There's so much in there. But just, trying to recognize that the media likes to hype up these things, likes to sensationalize these things, and that's not the reality. That's not the reality of how these substances appear in our lives. That's not the reality of how people are using these substances in the real world. And just to recognize and learn for yourself. Really, just don't take the movie's take from it specifically. Go and learn for yourself. And there's a lot of great resources for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's the whole thing, too. That's why the war on drugs got started. And it's like, if you really think about it, it's just like, why the fuck... are all these drugs illegal, but, you have these pill pushers, you have these alcoholics and stuff like that. It's just because, like, the media was telling us what drugs were okay and what were not, and it was all bullshit. So, I mean...
Yeah.
So, like, so much of this is just...
We could totally get into that another time. I would love to, reopen that topic at a later point. I do got to get going. Just curious if there's any like closing notes. Would you guys any closing takeaways, Nathan?
No, I think we pretty much hit every point I wanted to hit. Thank you so much for coming on, Brandon. It's been really great having you on, having a different perspective for this sort of thing. It's honestly been awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and actually, before we go, I guess, what do you want to plug? And we'll put it at whatever in the description of the podcast and stuff like that.
What do I want to plug?
In terms of like your online presence, like your counseling or like your YouTube channel or anything like that.
I am going to be starting up a mental health podcast discussing a variety of different topics that I discussed earlier. But if anyone does want to work with me one-on-one, I do offer coaching, and I also am working with offering counseling using an IFS-informed lens. So, parts work is primarily how I work with clients. Also looking into applying art therapy tools. So it's just, there's a variety of different ways I like to support people. Sometimes it's to integrate some of these challenging experiences we're talking about, right? I've been to Peru, I've volunteered in Ecuador, I've done lots of psychedelics. I know what it feels like to do these things and have these big breakthroughs, but not have any fucking clue where to go with it, what to do next. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, if that feels like that could be helpful to you, or if it's just talking about these things and processing stuff unrelated to psychedelics, that's kind of what I do. That's how I feel like I can be of service to people. So feel free to reach out over Instagram. I'm a Joyful Shadow Counseling on Instagram, or you could primarily find me that way. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I can vouch too because I've worked with Brandon on a lot of different things, and he knows what he's doing.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Brandon, again, and
Beautiful. Thank you so much, guys. This is wonderful. I had a lot of fun, and I'll talk to you soon.
Right.
Yeah, talk to you later, Brandon.
Have a good one, man.
Thank you so much. Oh, there he goes.
Nathan, you have a movie recommendation for next time?
Yes, I do, actually. So, actually, in a roundabout way, this is actually our first listener-requested movie. It comes from Lori. This is a movie that she watched a lot.
Lori?
Yeah.
Your mother?
Yeah, my mother. My mother is one of my big...
Lori.
Just to freak her out while she's listening. And yeah, she requested a movie a couple of months ago. A movie that she remembers whenever she was staying at someone's house when she was a kid, there was a couple of VHS tapes that she watched, and one of them was this movie that she hated so much that she really loathed and didn't really remember anything about, but she really wanted us to talk about it. So the movie for next month is
Okay, so this is your mother sadistically just pouring her own movie trauma onto us.
Exactly.
Okay. I dig it.
Yeah, I dig it too.
I dig it.
So this movie we're going to be watching next month is a movie I've never heard of up until this point, and I know nothing about. I don't know if you do either. It's 1988's The Beat.
The Beat?
The Beat. Do you know anything about this movie?
No, don't think I've ever heard about it.
Yeah, well, I always go down to jump into something I've never heard of before, so I guess we'll see how it is whenever we regroup next month. So, yeah, I'm really excited.
Okay, I mean, I'm curious.
Yeah,
I'm very curious. So, yeah, I guess
we'll go from there.
All right, yeah, The Beat. If you don't want to be spoiled for The Beat,
check it out.
Which apparently is a wonderful movie, then you can watch it before our next podcast. And on top of that, I guess all the standard things apply. You can follow us on YouTube. You can follow us on Spotify. You can go over to my YouTube channel, Okay Fine Be That Way, where I talk about a bunch of different things. And you can donate to us on that channel. You can donate to us through Super Chat, PayPal, all that things. I don't think you can actually do that on the Unrealistic Elephant podcast channel because
but
you
do it for
need
Ian
to be monetized.
He does so much
but,
for you.
Yeah. Talking about Game Dude is a real service to the world.
And Chris
and the irate gamer.
And Chris Bores. Come on. Yeah. Oh, you said that. Yeah. But yeah, this has been great. I thank you guys so much again for listening. And yeah, I think that's about everything. Ian, do you have anything else to say to all the good people out there?
Crack is whack. Don't do it.
Crack is whack.
I've never done it.
Crack is whack. Don't
whack.
do smack. And we'll see you guys next time on the Unrealistic Elephant podcast. So until then, see you next time.
See you next time until we see you next time.
Shut up.